Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TriStar webinar. Today's topic is going to be on the advanced framework extension as to how easy it is to help you with structural framework design. Before we start the webinar, just a few information here about the webinar itself. All of you are in listen-only mode. You're all muted, so towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session, or you can start typing your questions in the chat session. Before we take a look at the agenda, just some information about some offers that we are running through the end of this quarter on the PTC Creo simulation and analysis solutions. That's running through end of June. And also on the PTC certified virtual training, up to 60% off through the end of this month. And also on the PTC MathTech product, there's a promotion on that running through the end of this quarter. Just a reminder about the Import Data Doctor webinar, where we're going to cover about some techniques in the IDD functionality within Creo Parametric, wherein you have a chance to win a tailor-made driver. So just if you haven't registered for it, please visit our website and register for the thing. From an agenda standpoint, I really wanted to cover today the AFX functionalities, do a quick overview on the process and the capabilities. There's one of those extensions wherein you do have a light capability that's already built in to your Creo Parametric base license. So I wanted to make sure that some of you that may not have used it, or some of you may have used it, and how do you customize the libraries, or some of you who haven't seen it yet, just wanted to show you a few techniques and just do an overview on AFX. Now, like I said earlier, please feel free to start typing your question in the Q&A session, the question or the chat area in the GoToWebinar window. Before we talk about the AFX capabilities, typically I've seen wherein customers, when they do design of any type of structural framework, it could be a large assembly or it could be small assemblies, it doesn't matter. It's typically slow and error-prone process where you may be using a combination of 2D tools than traditional 3D CAD, right, based functionality. And a lot of the engineers' time is wasted modeling standard cross-sections, right, creating connections, defining, for example, the accessory elements, right, like stairs, railings, etc., right, that you see on the picture there. And also the hardware, right, assembling the hardware and the fastener, that's itself is a tedious process many times on such assembly. So so what you would ideally prefer is to automate these tedious tasks, right? These repetitive tasks that you do when you work on such a, do you want to do create a cross-section, extrude, and then start putting the assembly together, or could you use a top-down methodology, right? How do you reuse company standard and also implement rapid configuration design changes, right? And also at the same time, you want to make sure that right, the beams must be defined as individual parts, so we can generate an accurate BOM, and assembly cuts and references, right, must be eliminated to optimize the system performance, right, regardless of the CAD system you use. So with respect to Creo Parametric, imagine doing such assemblies in the base functionality using the Creo base functionality that you currently have, and that's always a challenge in my experience, where when we talk about challenges, right, it could be that, right, you are probably using third-party design tools or just out-of-the-box Creo functionality. Maybe you're using another application for analysis, but you would like to have one single integrated tool, right? And so instead of learning these different applications, and also, if you think about the performance when you work in large assemblies, Creo is very good at that. So we can take advantage of Creo Parametric and also the AFX functionality within Creo Parametric. So PTC has had this for a long time, actually. used to be called Expert Framework Extension. Currently, it's called AFX or Advanced Framework Extension. So it sits on top of your Creo-based license, right? You do have a light capability that's included. So if you are running Wildfire 5.0 or Creo 2 or Creo 3, you can already do a little bit of AFX functionality with a few limitations, obviously. So it's purpose-built, for specific framework design tasks, wherein you can select from a list of profiles, right? The length gets automatically adjusted based on your curve or skeleton part. You have a lot of options for joints, like you see in that picture. You have equipment, connections, all those are like automated. A lot of automation happens, and it's not like real typical CAD modeling that you're used to doing on large assemblies. At the same time, there's also specific drawing functionality with respect to framework. You can create, obviously, the bill of material table, maybe the cut list table, right, for the total length. So all those are specific to AFX. Now, as for the capabilities itself, you would start off in an assembly mode, and depending on are you on Creo 2 or Creo 3, Creo 3 is automatically enabled. If you are on Creo 2.0, there is a couple of config options that you have to enable. I'll talk about it a little later. And that will give you this framework tab that you see there, and you can see how it has a comprehensive library of cross-sections which can be customized, right? So the way the interface itself is, it's very much process-driven, right? You start off by creating a project, profiles, joins, adding connector elements, equipments, what have you. And you can even create weld groups. It's almost like creating simplified reps. So that in the drawing you could have your bill of material or views, where you can say, I want to display this particular weld group in my assembly, right? When you create multi-sheet drawing, for example, that would be a good practice. You can do that. So that's quite I'll show you when I demonstrate it real quick on what kind of library it has and how you can customize it. There's a huge, out of the box itself, PTC has done a pretty good job of having a huge variety of different profiles, end plates, gussets, what have you, right? And you can also customize them if required. It uses a top-down design process. So if I have to just do a quick overview of the AFX process, the methodology, or what are the stages or steps in which you would create something like what you see in the example. You start from a skeleton, right? So it's pretty straightforward and simple. You start off by creating a structural skeleton. It need not be an actual skeleton part. It could even be a bunch of curves that you have defined in assembly, right? And it can also be imported from any other third-party CAD system. Those curves could be imported, right? Like an IGES step file, etc. And once a curve structure is defined, right, the user selects the desired beam profile from the library, right, that you see there in step number 2, and you can quickly place beams, select curves or points, right, to define the placement, right. There are different options to place them. What you would see is when you place those, the beam length automatically will adjust to the span. To span the length of the curve, right? If you think about it, right? As long as you're really, that's why I said it's a top-down design process. And then after that, the next step is to specify how you would like these beams to fit together by defining beam joints, right? So do you want to have a miter or a T? What type of, do you want to have an overlap? Those type of joints are also predefined. So you just have to, so the trimming itself is automatic is my point here. In addition to the join, you can also define connector elements. So for that, for example, support plates, gussets, any other connector geometry, you can, again, all this can be customized on top of the existing library that you get. So really all these simplifies and speeds up the creation, right, of these type of framework assemblies, including stairs, rails, you can see ladders, beams, and end plates, right? And then, in order to place fasteners, you do have the intelligent fastener extension that's actually used to be part of AFX, and now it's part of their base Creo package that allows you to quickly create hole automatically and also select from a list of standards. So it's a smart way of assembling fasteners quickly. And the final step is obviously on the documentation for manufacturing, where you start creating your 2D drawings with your bill of material, table, balloons, etc. Right? And even that is automated. You can choose to either manually create the drawings for each part, detailed part of the entire assembly, or you can automate that. Creo 3.0, you have the ability to say, I want to automatically generate drawings for all the detailed parts that I use and that I created using AFX. Now, so stage one, you can see an example here, right? I have a couple of skeleton parts here, or maybe an assembly that has just curves, right, that you can define in your Creo sketch mode or import. And then the next step is obviously select from a style or a profile. And you can add to these, right? So, for example, right now, this is a out-of-the-box list that you get from PTC, but you could create new folders, right? You can add new content to it or new profiles if required, right? So that skeleton, the ultimate goal is to convert this, or the process is to get here, right? That's my final assembly there, right? It could be simple, it could be complex, right? So don't think it's really for huge frameworks. It could even be for this assembly right here, where how long is it going to take for you to do it in the standard Creo Parametric environment, where you start extruding these one by one and putting these together? How are you going to control these joints in here, right? How do you want to add the hardware, things like that? So all those can be automated using this process. You can select a joint style. You can see that they got, like you want to add a miter with a gap or an offset, right? Up to one surface or up to the other profile, including the option to have a profile cut out with offset or without offset. And then you can add end plates. You can select it'll ask you for placement references. It'll automatically cut back, including coping, right? And then you can add brazing, like a geometry like this, really quickly, and it automatically generates the holes too when you place those. And like I said, you do have some equipment. You can control the pitch, the tread size, etc. for when you place these type of stairs and rails, right? All those are automated. You're not really modeling something and then creating a family table or something and then redoing it every time or adding an instance. It is through an automated, almost like an automated app that walks you through these, right? And then, this is the intelligent fastener extension. You might have seen it in one of our previous webinars. If not, please check it out in our resource center, where we covered the automatic fastener, or the intelligent fastener extension that is new with Creo 3.0. In fact, it used to be part of the Expert Framework extension or Advanced Framework extension. And currently, it's available even if you don't own an AFX license. But that allows you to quickly generate, holes in the parts using datum points, axis, or simple mouse space, right? And then also it allows you to select from a library. And this can also be customized. And the last stage is obviously creating a 2D drawing with the views and the bill of material, table, balloons, right? Now, one thing while we are in the drawing is one thing that's quite important is creating the stock length table, the cut list table, right? So it's all these are, again, I'm not going to create a repeat region, and I don't even have to do that. It's automated. You can see that in the drawing mode. You do have quite a lot of options to automatically create component views, auto dimensioning, how to create a, you can just click on that, and for the assembly, it will give you the stock length table that you see, right? I have a couple of I-beams, 3 I-beams from different standards, the size, total length, etc., right? And all these are configurable, right? And the profiles that you saw in these screenshots so far, right? They were out of the box, but let's say you want to add more. It's just a matter of really, creating some directories, the selection list text file, a few GIFs for the actual button graphics. When you select, for example, a rectangular cube or a rectangular beam, right? You do have a graphics for that, and then the .tab files will have the dimension table, right? And there's also the .prt, which is kind of like your master part or your profile part. And if you see, by default, when you install the software, right, when you install Creo, for example, Creo 3.0, it does have all these, right? These are out of the box. And you can go add a new folder there, and as long as you can have something like this, right? So the .tab file, the GIF file, a couple of GIFs here, right, so that they know how to orient it, and just for selection. And then you have a .prt, which has all those intelligence to automatically trim based on the size of the curve on which you're going to place that particular profile. So right in here, you can see how it shows, right, the information here. It's really from here, right? You can see I want 3 dimensions, right? And this is based on the table, right? I want a big in table. So you can see that this is something that you can really customize if required. You can also customize the naming. When you create these, remember I told you it's automatically creating these profiles, right? Based on your selection, what kind of naming convention should you be using? Should you be using Winchell auto-numbering scheme? Should you have your own specific naming convention? And that can all be controlled, right? It's using an element name.txt file, right, in that particular profile directory, and you can control those. Now, earlier I talked about AFX Lite, wherein it's included in the base license. So pretty much all of you that you're currently using Creo Parametric, you should be able to access AFX Lite, right? Now, it does have some limitations, like up to 20 profiles, right, up to 10 through connections, etc., right? But you can, in the full license, you don't have these limitations, obviously, and this has been there since Pro Engineer Wildfire 5.0 M010, right, the maintenance date code 10, from which you were able to access AFX Lite. Now, this is an example of a part, or an assembly, I should say, that's done using the old EFX Lite. In the Wildfire days, we used to call it EFX. Now we're calling it AFX. So it does have some limitations, but the way that you, let's say you've not used it before, you have not seen this framework tab in Creo 2 or in Wildfire 5, you have not seen that. Remember to run the installer again, right, in Creo Parametric and or in Wildfire 5, and remember to turn on this advanced framework extension or expert framework extension, depending on the release that you use. In Creo 3, it's automatically checked, but in the previous releases, it may not be. So just remember that when you install it, you pretty much can customize right in here. As you can see, you can customize, and when you customize, you get to select what features get installed, right? Depending on the licenses, you can select that. But this one, if you want the light functionality, you want to make sure that's installed. And then the config.pro option here, right? EFX enabled or AFX enabled, right? You want to set that to yes, and then restart Creo. It requires a restart once you turn on that config option. And then you'll get, when you go into an assembly mode, you have the option to start creating using AFX Lite. You have additional information, and read this first. There's so many documentation around AFX in the PTC knowledge base, in the support page. You can also access that. But for those who have not used it, this is the way you can use it. And if and when you upgrade or get a license of the full AFX, you can just remember to just do your license configuration so you can access the AFX or the extension. And then you got to restart Creo so you can use the full functionality rather than the light functionality. So with that, let me quickly show you an example. What I have is an assembly. This could be a skeleton part, but I do have, as you can see, my curves, a few copied curves, a few patterns, etc. Right? I just have a bunch of curves, and that's kind of like the skeleton of my framework. And in Creo 3, as soon as you open an assembly, you should have access to this framework tab. And I'm going to create a new project. Give it some name there. That project name is going to be used in the part naming convention. You can control all that, right? You can control the prefix for parts and assemblies, what parameters get inherited, for example. So all that can be controlled. But let's say I want to start adding some profiles, right? That's a stage 1, right? So you can see how the process itself, I mean, it's very much process-driven. You start adding profiles, joins, connector elements, equipments, right? Sub-assemblies if required, add the well groups if required, and then start creating your component drawing. So this is the automation tool I was talking about, where you select that and automatically generates parts, drawings of all parts that are in this assembly really quickly in one shot. For now, I'm going to start with a profile, and the profiles that I'm getting, that it comes out of the box, as you can see, is right beams, inches, metric, sheet metal, right, Bosch profiles, right. You can see all these. I have not customized this. It's just out of the box that you should get. You should see this, right. Okay, so this is the one I was talking about, where you can add additional folders, and using those few files that I mentioned, you are able to customize that. Now, let's say I want to go to steel beams, and maybe I want to select a rectangular cube, right? Now, when I select that, I'm presented with that GIF file that I was talking about, right? Where I get a button image here. Or an image here where it has the dimensions called out, and I could start selecting, different values, for example, or I could go back, select a totally different one, for example, millimeters, for example, right? And I want to select rectangular cube. What standard do I want? Let's say you have, a lot of international standards as well. Then 2395, for example, and I can select the size. So you're really not modeling it, is my point. And say I want to get to so I selected one of the sizes here. And how do I place it, right? You have some placement options to curve, points, bend curve, etc. But first, I got to select my datum plane, right, as to where how it's going to be oriented. So once I select the plane, I could select the point, all right, or the curve, I should say, and I can select additional curves. And you see how it starts to place it, and it labels it with a 3D annotation there. So like this, I could start placing additional ones. Now, each time I can control the orientation. So if you look at the orientation here, right, see how this is a plane I'm selecting. Of course, if it's in the wrong orientation, I have the option to rotate it and everything. There's a lot of modification tools. But right now, when I'm placing it, let's say I want to place it in a different, like in these curves, right, these two curves. So in that case, I'm going to use another datum plane for my section orientation, right? So I'm going to select another datum plane, and I start placing it on those curves, right? So it's quite easy to place these. And then let's say I do want to place some additional ones, but this time I might want to reassemble, right? So I want to reassemble this profile or this part. You can see in my model tree, it's starting to create with my project name, right? It's starting to create with the project name. It's using some generic names, and you can customize or control all this. Naming conventions, like I said earlier, there are some options to do that. But that's a default behavior, right? It's using coordinate systems, points. That's how it's trimming all this. Now, once I place these type of parts, I can also reassemble them. So I can reassemble them, create a copy of it, etc. Right? So if I want to reassemble, for example, this is what I want to reassemble, and I want to use this as my profile plane. I'm going to say I want to reassemble it here, right? Similarly, I could say I want to reassemble this guy, right? And I want to start reassembling it in this location, for example, right? I want to reassemble it in this location, so you can see the part naming convention there, right? it's using the same part, the cube 1. You see how it's using the same part name and reassembling it. Now, I just placed some basic profiles here. That's all I did. Now, I could also use 2 points. For example, let's say I want to choose a beam here. Instead of a cube, I want to go for a rectangular beam, wherein I'm going to select the standard, and let's say I want to go with one of the sizes here. And unlike before, instead of using curves, I could choose to use points too, right? I could just say the end of this point to the end of this point, and there it goes, right? There's your rectangular beam, right? Similar to that, I could start adding, even on a bent curve, for example, right? I have a bent profile. Can I do that? Absolutely, right? I could go, for example, let's say I want to choose a different size this time, though, right? Rectangular beam, but then I want to say a smaller one here, right? I have the option to select a bent curve. There it goes, right? So you see how it labels it also, right? So I can also use pattern. For example, if I had a beam, let's say I want to go to another size here, maybe a larger one. Right, I've selected that, but now I would like to start placing it on this curve, right? Now that's a new one, right? I want to make sure that I use my data plane reference, right? And I want to start using this curve, and there it goes. But how do I start patterning it? Now, if you see in all these, it's actually using a few datum features to really adjust the length, right? I'm going to group that. And so I can go do a pattern, because I know it's on a curve that has a pattern. You can see that I already have a pattern curve, and I'm doing a reference pattern on that, right? So far I've been adding profiles, but just like the adding profiles, I also can add a joint. For example, I could start adding a few joints. So I want to go to the joint, and you see that you got a pretty good list of the different options you have. So in this case, obviously here, you can see I need to correct these things. So I can add different types of joints, for example, a corner joint, with gap, without gap, with offset, etc. Right? So I want to go add a corner joint here, where my selection, which one I select first, right? The 1, 2. It's pretty straightforward. You see, it tells you which one is going up to which surface, or which frame is going to go, or which profile is going to go up to which frame, right? Similarly, I could say maybe right here, right? So I could keep adding joints like these, or maybe I could also add a miter. For example, I want to say this to this, right? So if I look at here shaded with edges, you can see how, right, how it has trimmed them automatically. Now I do have a problem here, because remember we use the same profile here, so it has mitered that too, which makes sense. But there's a way to fix that, right? I could, in my profiles, I can quickly move, right? I could just do rotation of the profiles. I could simply select this profile and say I want to do a 180. Right, there it is, right? I could quickly do that, and I can get back to my joint, and I could say I want to add a miter, right? Again, and I could say between this and this. There it goes, right? So very quickly I can do that. Similarly, I could add a joint and say I want to do, for example, a T, and I'd say this one goes to this, right? This guy goes to this one. Similarly for all these guys, right? There it goes, right? And you see how it is applied on all 4 of them. It's the same part. So imagine, would you be able to do these in the traditional methodology that you may have used, right? You could be an expert in regular Creo parametric functionalities and creating features or part modeling or assembly, but is it, this is really automating this, right? That's what I'm showing you here. I can also add, for example, I want to show you a profile cutout option. That's also pretty powerful, where let's say I want to add another profile. For example, I want to add here a channel. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So I selected one of those standards or a profile. I've selected it. Now I want to show you what happens. How would you be able to do a profile cutout, right? So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my curve, and I've placed it. It's pretty straightforward, but now maybe I want to start placing, let's see here, a square cube. So, for example, I want to start placing a square cube from, let's see, I'll select a certain size. And I might want to place it on this curve. Okay, so how am I going to handle this situation, right? What type of joint would I give for such cases? I would just say, I want to create a profile cutout, right? So when I do a profile cutout, I have the option to add an offset or not. So here, when I go to the profile cutout, right, it's I want to select the profile to cut, right, and to what it should be referenced, and there it goes, right? So if I were to activate this part now, you could see how it has done a profile cutout. So this is what when I kept mentioning that it's it's an automated, almost like an application that walks you through the entire process. This is what I meant as to how quick and easy it is. So I can go back to my framework. I can add some equipments or connector elements, for example, right? I could say I want to add, for example, and you could see you even have a pipe squash, believe it or not, right? So you could select end plates, right? You could say I want to have, for example, an angle, right? And when I do that, I could say, okay, my profile end, one end is going to be this, the other end is going to be this guy, and I click OK, and there it goes, right? So you could really add that, or maybe you can go to equipments, right? You have the option to add plates. If I go to beam end plates, right, I could add an end plate, for example. So it's quite a lot of options available. But my point is, once you do something like this, right, if you open up the drawing, so in this case, I didn't have any formatted here. You do have a few views I've placed, but my table, right, if I go to my table, there's my profile, like my bill of material table. I can go to framework and say create a stock length table, right? So there's my stock length table, or I could create a cut list table. So, and what about the other drawings, right, for the individual parts? I can go back to my assembly, right, and I can create, I've not set up any templates here, but just want to show you the way ease with which you're able to, you see what it's doing. I'm not doing anything here right now. I just clicked on that button, create component drawings, and it's behind the scenes. It's using a default format, applying views for each one of those parts that we have created in this assembly. So, right, I mean, obviously that's something that you can customize based on some standard templates, but it's automated, right? So, going back to my presentation while it's doing that, if you can start typing in, hopefully you got a good overview on what is Advanced Framework Extension. You could start typing in your questions. Let me see if we have any. Can profile cut be shown in the software? Extremely important in tailored design. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The profile cut. Remember, it's actually what it's doing is the way it's creating the profile cutout that you saw me do in the example is it's using kind of like a quilt, a use quilt to remove material, right? The solidify command actually to do that. But yes, it can be shown in the software in the sense that it can be shown on the profile, right? I showed you when I activated the part. Can you add weld symbols easily? Yes, you can. If you have, I mean, weld groups that I mentioned was more for creating a simplified rep of a few components. But if you want to add a weld symbol, you could do that by going to, ideally you want to go to the Pro Welding module, right? You go to welding, and then you can start actually showing it, and thereby you have a representation of the weld in the 3D assembly as well as in the 2D drawing. What if I want to detail each individual member in the assembly drawing? Yeah, in the assembly drawing, if you want to detail out each component, I mean, just the traditional method of activating that particular part, right? You have to activate that part, add it to the drawing, and then you can start creating dimensions individually for that part. Yes, you can. Or you can do it. I know the automation tool that I showed you created separate drawings for separate part files, but it can also be done in one assembly drawing. All right, looks like those were the questions. So again, before we wrap up here, just a reminder, wherein you know, we have the offer for the PTC Creo solution analysis tools, right, for the end of this month of June, and also some pretty good offer on certified virtual PTC training, and also on the MatCat product. And please, just a reminder on, if you have not registered yet, for the Import Data Doctor webinar coming up in August. All right, so let's see, I think I have one more question there. How to watch a session again? Yeah, all these are going to be made available in our resource center. If you go to tristar.com and go to the resource center, you do have recordings of all the webinars that we have done. They're archived, so if you or one of your colleagues couldn't watch the actual live webinar, we have it in our resource center. All right, with that, thanks for your time. We look forward to seeing you all soon in another webinar. Until then, have a great rest of the week and have a nice weekend.